Good morning, everyone. It is the Rangers review. It is very much the morning after the night before. We are here to discuss in more detail what unfolded last night in Belgium, the ramifications, how Rangers have got here, how they get out of here, and what comes next. I'm joined by Jonny McFarlane to do so. A quick reminder before we get into lots and lots of conversation. This video is brought to you by Willows Fencing, reliable Glasgow-based fencing company you can trust. If you want a discount, and all the links, you can get that in the description below. And we will get right into it. Jonny, Blair and I were on last night to kind of talk about this in the heat of the moment. One of the shambolic performances Rangers have had in Europe ever. You know it's a bad night. You know it's a cataclysmic night when people are texting at halftime trying to work out what Rangers' heaviest defeat is, what the heaviest defeat in European competition is. At 5-0 at halftime, cricket score actually was possible, and you thought, to what extent will Bruges run away with it? I've kind of had my piece at it last night, and we'll talk about it with a bit of space from the game, but I will throw it over to you to start with to just give us a sense of what your thoughts and feelings and emotions are a day after what you witnessed last night.
Yeah, well, there's the Rangers reaction, and then there's the kind of winder football reaction, which is last night was the night that the Poundland Pep died. If you look at Ruben Amorim at Manchester United, another club that's had a terrible, terrible period, just like Rangers, there seems to be an entwined set of fortunes that these two clubs that did so well in the 90s are forever stuck in this purgatory. And this sort of Guardiola positional philosophy for me is in its twilight days anyway. You look at Pep down there in Manchester City and the struggles that he's going through, and Rangers seem to have imported this philosophy into the team at the wrong time. And I'll be honest, it's the wrong club. The DNA of Rangers, the DNA of any club, Josh, is massively, massively important when it comes to managerial fit. I had a wee think about this last night, and this has always been forefront of my mind when I've been thinking about Russell Martin. And I think about who Rangers' greatest ever player is, John Greig. It's not Paul Gascoigne, it's not Brian Laudrup, it's not Ali McCoist, it's John Greig. And I wrote down 10 words that I associate with John Greig. And they were loyalty, leadership, versatility, power, strength, never say die attitude, commitment, combative, tough, big game mentality. That is the DNA of Rangers, as typified, as exemplified by John Greig. The tippy-tappy, horseshoe style of football, possession-based, is never going to stick with the Rangers DNA. And Rangers need to look at this managerial appointment and act fast, because this will never work. And it's clear as day now after 10 games, after 3 wins in 10 games, a 33% win record at Rangers, that this is not going to work. There were small shoots, green shoots at the start. In the first 4 games, there was little things you could see and think, okay, I can see what he's trying to do. The remarkable thing about this Russell Martin period is that with every passing game, they have gone backwards. They have looked worse. They have regressed. And we're now at a stage where a Rangers team can't even do the basics. Don't get carried away about Club Brugge being an excellent side. They were not. I would have fancied Philip Clement or Barry Ferguson's Rangers to have gone into a tie with them with a 50-50 chance. This result and these 2 games are defined by the incompetence of the approach of the manager. And there is no getting away from that. You watched that game last night, it was like watching a schoolboy team. What are they working on? It's impossible to decipher. You know far more about tactics than I do, Josh, but what I have done is watch Rangers for far longer than you. Many, many, many years. And I know what makes a Rangers team tick. And I know what makes this teams in this country tick. And this ain't ever going to work. Everyone knows it. Every media outlet knows it. They're all saying the same thing. Every fan media outlet knows it. They're all saying the same thing. It simply cannot continue. And it's unfair on Russell Martin, actually, to throw it into the bear pit of Ibrox on Sunday. Because as bad as Celtic are, and I watched them both games against Kairat Almaty, and they are poor and going through their own struggles. They are a better side than Rangers, and a significantly better side. And not because they have particularly far better players, just because Rangers have good players that aren't being properly utilised. Josh, it's a mess. The 45 minutes that I saw last night was the single worst 45 minutes I've ever seen, and I'm including the so-called banter years in that. It was a disgrace, and the kind of football you wouldn't expect to see in a public park.
Yeah. Hard to disagree with any of that. I'm just somewhat distracted because your Man United comparison. I wrote this last week, and we'll get through comments, but I think we're going to just have a bit of a therapeutic chat for the first kind of 20 minutes or so. I'm sure we'll be on for a little bit of an extended briefing. But said last week, many, and you'll know this as well, many from previous, in particular the previous regime, Jonny, like to draw that parallel with Man United privately. A club that should win but can't see the forest and the trees trying to become winners again. And I spoke a little bit about, obviously, United lost last night, but watching their game against Arsenal, the first game of the season, they were quite direct, and the crowd really liked it. The crowd went with that, even though they didn't win. And I said there's an impatience at clubs like this that bleeds from the stands onto the pitch. Goals should have come 5 minutes ago, trophies yesterday. Tactics are all encompassing, and this is the environment Martin is operating within. So I agree with a lot of what you've said there. For me, what has happened in this last month at Rangers and what happened last night was a kind of indicative of, and I've just written about this on the website, which people can go and read if they want to after this, but indicative of this summer as a whole, which has been based too much on idealism and not on reality. So will know that I probably sit far to one side on that scale. I think appointing a philosophy manager, there's theory to that, although the extremity to that is to be questioned, and I think we have questioned that over the course of the past month. But almost the comment that summed it up for me, Jonny, is, before I put it back to you, is something that Russell Martin said quite a lot, which is that normally we'd only be 2 games into the season by now. But Rangers aren't, and they knew they wouldn't be. And they knew that either they had to do 2 things. They had to get it absolutely perfect, a summer where recruitment was perfect, where they signed 4 or 5 leaders to get them out of holes, and they basically learned how to play this way in 8 weeks. Or they either hired a manager who could adapt a little bit, or made sure that Russell Martin was going to, so you didn't have nights like last night. Because the first half, for me, there is no value, and I said this to Blair, there's no value in Rangers continuing to try and play it 1-0 down. I don't think you learn anything. Russell Martin says Rangers keep making it hard for themselves, but I think that's because the players look uncomfortable. Surely, Jonny, and I know you want to talk about defending, so I'll put it back to you. But for me, the issue with that defending in the first half is, rather than Rangers just going, right, we're going to go 5-4-0, we're going to bring Raskin on, we're going to bring Manny Fernandez on, a defender who's 23 that they spent over £3 million on. We're just going to suck it up, and we're going to keep it from getting embarrassing. Instead, you have a night then that opens up so much, so many wounds, gives you so much fresh scar tissue. For what? You know, and that's there's an argument which we'll come on to maybe that which I discussed in my piece, and I mentioned it last night about Mikel Arteta at Arsenal, this idea of the elite managers, and Guardiola is an example of this. They adapt. Like, he played 4 centre-backs across his back 4 to win the Champions League. You know, he didn't win in England by just making Plan A better and better. He adapted it, and he changed little bits. And, you know, he signed the number 9 of all number 9s in Haaland. He played 4 centre-backs across the back. Mikel Arteta's Arsenal have become like they get thrown that they're the second coming of Stoke because of their set pieces. But that for me is like what the best managers do. It's not that they don't have a core idea and they don't have something to fall back upon, but they adapt at the right time so the players aren't in uncomfortable positions. And I thought when you saw Jeji Gassama trying to defend his back post, or Lyle Cameron trying to defend a header for the 4th and 5th goals, that for me, to give it back to you, epitomised the dogmatism, the extent of that, which is the real issue, I think, at the crux of this conversation.
Football's not that different in a lot of ways for any other business, for any other job. Like, imagine you're the leader of a construction site and another construction company comes to you and says, come and join us. and you say, yeah, I need some guys to join me, and they let you probably bring one or two guys alongside you to give you some people you know around you. And then you say, no, I can't do this job because I need to basically wholesale change. I need to turn over all the stuff because they have to adapt to me. I won't adapt to you. You just be laughed out of the building in any other business. So this is a sort of, it's like drink the Kool-Aid stuff that's been going on at some clubs. And listen, I don't doubt that at some clubs, there's got more chance of success with that kind of philosophy. But Rangers isn't one of them. Rangers needs a manager that can adapt to the different circumstances. You cannot tell me that St Mirren at Ibrox is anything like Club Brugge away or Celtic away and any game against a kind of an Alloa or whatever in the cup. Rangers need different styles for different games. I'm not talking about changing it up every game. And remember, about 80% of these games kind of fall under one category. But you need to have a manager who can adapt and change. And if you don't have that, you're lost. But listen, we've seen managers like that at Rangers before who have had more success than Russell Martin. And the problem with Russell Martin is that the rhetoric doesn't match the results. That what he says and what he promises, he doesn't deliver on. And I think that's why people are so angry, because we had this already to a certain extent with Michael Beale, who in some ways I feel gets a little bit of a bad rap and people underestimate his abilities because he himself allowed himself to talk himself into so many problems. And Michael Beale did this manana thing. It'll all coalesce. It'll all come together tomorrow. And it never did. And people were really angry because they bought into it. And I think with Russell Martin, it's the same. It's that sense of promising something, saying something's going to come, and you just go, and there's no substance to any of this. It doesn't actually hang together because nothing you're seeing on the pitch is giving you any evidence whatsoever that this stuff will come together. You mentioned Josh defence, and I think it's so important that we drill into the detail of defence, because to me it's any good manager will come into a club and look at the defence and go, right, what do we need to do to solidify this team? Philip Clement did it when he came in at Rangers and had some success in his first 6 months. He solidified defensively. And you look at that Rangers defence, 3 loan players in the 4 first picks. One guy who's 19, another Aarons who's, has had an absolutely terrible start. There's just no doubt about it. He's been really, really, really poor. Giga started well and now looks like he's completely lost. He's clearly a good player because he's played at the Champions League. He got a big move to the Premier League. That doesn't happen unless you have something. Yeah. And John Souttar, who I've always felt is an absolutely fine Rangers centre-back as part of a 4-man centre-back team. But to me, not the defensive leader. Absolutely not. So there's a question about commitment, given they're all loan players, and quality. Souttar's also got a question around his future. He's only got a year left in his deal. What's going to happen there? Why is he not signed a new deal? Is he going to be looking for a move in 6 months? Because that's when he can start negotiating. So that defence, there's already massive question marks over it. And then you look at last night and you look at the goals, and I think this is so important. You start going to yourself, right, what sort of goals that are Rangers losing? Well, they're losing the most basic of goals for any Scottish team, which is balls into the box. 5 goals, the first 5 goals, Josh, are crosses. 3 of them are headers. These are low XG opportunities, but Rangers make them high XG opportunities because they can't mark and they can't deal with balls into the box. You look at the first goal, Aarons doesn't get tight enough to his man, but the cross comes into the box, but Giga's nowhere near him. You need to be tight. You need to be aggressive. That's not defending. I mean, Richard Gough watching that must be tearing his hair out, looking at that, going, I cannot believe what I'm seeing here. No, Nasser Giga is not Richard Gough, but you get the points, like the basic stuff of defending. Second goal, set piece, corner straight into the box, no one marking the man, header, boom, goal. Third goal, back post, not one shot. The guy gets 2 bites at the cherry to put the ball in the back of the net. Third one, unmarked volley. Fourth one, unmarked header. What are we talking about here, Josh? We're talking about the absolute basics of football. And wait till you hear this stat, because this stat's the killer. Josh. Aerial duels. Club Brugge won 88% of aerial duels in that game last night. Rangers, 12% of aerial duels. This is a Scottish team.
Yeah.
I mean, this is absolute rank incompetence at the level of coaching. Because how can you have a team that deals in this league that can't deal with crosses into the box? It's damning, that stat. Absolutely damning. And there's a whole lot of other stats that we can get into that are equally damning.
Yeah.
But that one, to me, just is you have not understood the job.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, we'll stay on defending for a minute. I want to talk about recruitment as well and how that feeds into this whole conversation. But I think one of our YouTube members here, Andrew Phillips, sums it up well. Can't be defending from our halfway line. When the team came out with no Nico Raskin, I think everyone went, oh, because Joe Rothwell was skipped by easily in the middle of the park after 2 minutes. And that was the first time Bruges got up the pitch. And Martin spoke a lot about we want to chase them before the game. And it just felt to me like the whole idea was centralised again on what we're going to do with the ball. And I think you see that then when the game goes to 10 men, like fundamentally, Rangers are a team who, we saw this with Pilsen away, we've used this example a lot, that Russ Martin wants to have the ball and he sees that as the best way of defending. But again, I think this is where you need to compromise. Rangers are not good enough on the ball at the moment to not lose the ball in cheap areas. So when he says, and I'll read this quote from last night, when he says, the most hurtful thing is we made it so tough for ourselves. We did it last Tuesday. We did it tonight. So much self-inflicted pain. And as a group, we're not strong enough to respond to a bit of disappointment. Our response to disappointment is just so poor. I think the rational response to that is, it's been made tough for the players because they're defending in this really high line, really, really high and aggressive line, which Bruges exploited easily. Bruges, I think, by comparison, have the athleticism, the marginal gains at the set pieces, which we spoke about at the weekend. The set pieces have just been, I mean, that's a separate point to come on to. But again, here's the point for me. Okay, I'll come back to you. The point then, if Russ Martin might come back with, is okay, but to make this ideal work, you need to have the short-term pain, and all my other clubs have shown we can get through it. But this is where I think the lack of reality from those making decisions at Rangers is come in, is that you're not 2 games into a season by now in the Championship. You're 9 games in, and you've got a must-win game against Celtic in a couple of days' time. So they must have, there's been a lack of, again, I go back to idealism against reality that I think feeds right down to the approach. You want to talk maybe about set pieces, is it?
No, I was just going to talk to you there a little bit about the high line, because I think it's really, really important. I watched the goals and the key moments back like 5 times last night, because I wanted to be absolutely sure before I came on here and had a rant. And we've not kind of touched on Aaron's moment.
Yeah.
But there's a brilliant angle from it's almost like the corner of Butland's goal, where you can see what happens in that moment. And again, it's Rangers getting undone by a simple ball over the top. We saw it against St Mirren with their goal in the last domestic game. And we've seen it a few times this season, let's be honest. But the thing is how far those defenders are forward. John Souttar is on the edge of the centre circle in the opposition half. So he's 10 yards from him to the halfway line. So all they have to do is literally ask the winger who's on Max Aarons to just make a curved run in behind. And that, because you look at it, Josh, see if you don't see that angle, you look at it and you go, what's Aarons doing there? Why is he over on the left flank? How has that happened? And it's simply an example of Russell Martin's asking these players to do something they're not capable of doing. Now, if you have a Calvin Bassey as left centre-back in that scenario, you're so much more comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
But Giga and Souttar are not known for being absolute speedsters, are they? You know, and asking them to do that against a club of and a team of the quality of Bruges, and I've already said I don't think they're great shakes, but they're certainly a very good team, a functional team. Yeah. You're going to get punished. And again, it just comes down to asking those players to do things, I think, that they're not that comfortable doing. And I think if you watch the game and you watch the Tavernier interview after the game, I think they strong rumblings there that perhaps the players aren't 100% all in on this philosophy either. And interestingly, I spoke to someone who's down at Southampton, who watched the Russell Martin tenure down there very, very closely. And he said that he spoke to one of the players after Russell Martin left. And this was a player that really liked Russell Martin and his career had benefited from that time because he'd been played a lot. He fitted the system. He was a good ball player. And he said, look, in the Premier League, we're just not good enough to pull this off. We don't have the quality. He's asking us to do things that we're not capable of doing. And this is a guy saying, I love Russell. I think he's a brilliant guy. I think he's a good manager. But he was asking me to do things I couldn't do at that level because it was too quick in front of me. The guys were too physical. We couldn't pull it off. And I look at this Aarons incident. I know a lot of people are saying about Max Aarons, oh, he's chucked it there. That's a moment of madness because he just had enough of being on the pitch. I actually don't think so, honestly. I'd defend him a little bit because when you see it from another angle, you kind of understand what's happened and why. He certainly shouldn't pull him, Josh. I mean, it's just let him go through and have a shot. He's killing his team in that situation. But I think if you see it from that angle, you can see why it's happened. And it's a function of the coach.
Yeah, and again, it's the extremity, isn't it? Where it's like, I think if you go into that game last night, Rangers are in a difficult position, but I think they've conceded these early goals so often. They've conceded chances to such a high degree that the expected goals for everyone who I know will be desperate to learn in the comments is if I can just find it over the course of the season so far. Across their 9 games, Rangers have averaged 571 passes to their opponents' 328, but they've conceded 2.14 to the 1.39 created. And that's across the board. That's including the game against the Alloa and in the Scottish Premiership too. So for me, it feels like, okay, we've got this idea, which is at the extreme end, and it takes a lot to work. It takes pretty perfect spot on recruitment, the right club and the right environment. You don't have that, as we've established culturally because of what the last few years have been like. You need maybe a couple of big results early on, a couple of big performances. But then when it doesn't work, if you stay at that extremity, then I think you have goals conceded like last night. Let's get to a few comments before we move on, maybe to talk about recruitment. Buckshot saying Bruce took pity at 6-0. And
I don't think there's any doubt about that, by the way. They took their foot off the gas in the second half.
Yeah, the
stats are there.
Yeah, the 3 goals conceded before halftime. I can barely remember watching that at any level anywhere. And again, that comes back to like what you fall back upon. Anyway, we're getting away from the comments. Mac, a good friend of the show, the players are traumatized, and it could happen again on Sunday. The atmosphere on Sunday at Ibrox if Rangers don't go into a lead. I fear to think what that will be like. Blue Yonder raises a great point, which I want to stick on maybe for a moment then before we go into recruitment. The wrong philosophy for the players. Raskin, our best player, looks a shadow of himself. This, for me, there's been a bit of uncertainty about Nico Raskin's future for a long time, Jonny, and Rangers might not have been able to keep him regardless. He was their best player last season, and he was on the bench last night, and Russell Martin spoke about uncertainty over his future post-match. But I don't think he's been helped by the fact that someone's been brought in to play in his favourite position. And again, this is the compromise point for me, because Raskin is a little bit loose on the ball sometimes, not understanding this system. In the idealised view, maybe you want someone a bit more secure on the ball. But I think rather than signing Rothwell, you go, right, give us 1 more year. In their contract situation aside, that's another conversation. We're going to make you the focal point in the middle. And it gives you money and resource to go and spend on one of the many other problem positions in the pitch. Because what Rangers have done, I think, is take the 2 outfield leaders they did have in Tavernier and Raskin, who've had their faults, and we can't just have our. It's so easy to look back on this with hindsight bias. Like the opening day of the season, both were poor. I think both rely too much on their individualism at points, and they're not avoid from criticism. But if you were gonna usurped Tavernier. You needed someone who was better than him. I don't think Max Aarons is. And the fact that one of your first big kind of marquee signings, Joe Rothwell, on a 3-year contract, was in that number 6 position when there was so many other areas of the squad to work out. Again, Jonny, that's why I'm talking about idealism and reality right across the board. Even looking down to the number of leaders that Rangers have signed, because again, what I think they've done is signed a load of young players and said, "Can you go and fix this deep-rooted systemic issue for us, please?" Instead of like Lyle Cameron, who is someone who probably should come in and play 20, 30 games, but suddenly is relied upon right away. Instead of let's sign 4 or 5 guys that we can build around that are going to cost a little bit more. Maybe don't spend the $3.5 million on Manny from Fernandez. Maybe just have Ciala as one of your backup centre backs and take the money from Manny Fernandez and put that together with someone else and get a £7 million winger instead of a £3 million winger or a £7 million striker from the off. You take my point that right across the board.
Josh, look, they've underestimated, in my view, Scottish football. And look, the truth of this is that, look, last night is a disaster. But apart from last night, and the European thing is the European thing. Last night is a dreadful result. But Russell Martin got a good result against Panathinaikos. There's no doubt about that. They were good against Pilsen at home, not good away, but the game was dead by that point. And I think I always said, get past Panathinaikos, and as far as I'm concerned, the European thing is you've hit the requirement. But the domestic situation is what's important, because every Rangers fan has suffered through what feels like season after season after season of the teams struggling with the same issue, and that is the low block. And I said this on X last night. Rangers should not have been looking to throw the baby out with the bathwater. This team that Clement had built had its flaws, but ultimately it was a team that got to the quarterfinal of the Europa League and looked pretty comfortable at that level. You know, my argument would be, well, like Cyril Dessers should have been given a penalty at 0-0 in Bilbao. And then, you know, it might have been a very, very different game. It was a stonewaller. Rangers performed brilliantly in that home game after having someone sent off under Barrie Ferguson in the Europa League. So they could perform at a high level against a high-level team. And they showed that in the games against Celtic. Again, very unlucky in the cup final. A terrific 3-0 win at Ibrox, a terrific win at Parkhead. And I think overall, most people, even Celtic fans, I think would admit that Rangers got the better of Celtic in one-off games last season. So what was the problem? Well, the problem was that they couldn't deal with the low block. So solve that problem. Go out and get some players that can handle Scottish football. They might not play in Europe. They might not be ideal for that. But get people who can perform in the league. I mean, this is why I like Miovski a lot, Josh. And Miovski's not a perfect solution either, because I think if you look at the data, he is better when he was playing into space for Aberdeen against the bigger teams. But he's got a big game mentality. If you look at his goals, every individual finish, very crisp striker of the ball, very, very accurate finisher. So I think he's got it. He can come in and adapt. But Rangers need more people that can do that. You know, where are the Scottish players that can come in, or the English players who have been through the fire a bit in their careers, who've got the character to come in and add something? That's what's required. Absolutely, that's what's required. And until Rangers deal with that domestic issue, there's going to be a lot of pain. And it's easy to look at a Lawrence Shankland or a Scott McKenna and say, oh, these guys aren't good enough. What are you talking about, McFarlane? What are you talking about? These guys, but these are guys that have proven it year after year in the Premiership, who can deal with these games. And they don't have to play in every game. But, you know, every Rangers side, every Rangers manager that I've seen be successful has always utilised that kind of sign, always utilised that kind of player. And when it comes down to this sort of stuff, when it comes down to a really, really difficult situation when you're having to play for the badge almost, as they were last night, because they were already out. There was nothing kind of to play for apart from pride.
Yeah.
You need some boys in that dressing room that care, not a bunch of guys that are on loan and don't know the club from Adam. I mean, you saw what Igamane has done to get his move. And that's the problem when you're bringing in people that have no connection to the club whatsoever, don't really understand why it's important to people. you need a balance. You need a balance between the guys who can carry people through and the guys that know the league and can give you a level of performance that brings you up against the teams that Rangers have struggled against, like the Motherwells of this world, the St Mirrens of this world. And I'm not being disrespectful, because I thought both Motherwell and St Mirren were absolutely fantastic in the games. Made them really good spectacles in terms of a neutral watching it. You're coming at it from a Rangers point of view. You look at those games and you go, how is this possible? This was a team that got to the quarterfinal of the Europa League last year and has had £20 million spent on it.
Yeah, and I think that was, Chris and I yesterday spoke a bit about the fact that Rangers, what they did recruitment wise last summer, had its mistakes. I think, like any recruitment policy did, a lot less money was spent than this summer. You flip 2 players for a fair chunk of money. That's not been done routinely at Ibrox because it's not an easy thing to do. But there was that blend of then trying to sign some Scottish talent. I think Rangers would have signed Josh Mulligan had the recruitment stayed the same. Had been changed there. Now, he wouldn't have fixed absolutely everything, but again, I agree with you to a point. But again, I just think it's how to what extent you're adaptable, because I think you can have this idea of like, right, we're talking here about, okay, Rangers were good in Europe last year, but they were terrible domestically. So it does make sense to go, right, let's focus in on that, because the last season at Ibrox was this season is rivaling it so far yet again, but it was one of the worst domestic campaigns I can remember. So I think it makes sense to go, okay, we can't really win in games where we dominate the ball. Let's get a manager in who can do that. But my general point is, I think there's a middle ground between what it appears Rangers have done so far, from recruitment to tactical ideas, to not really considering the context of what the fans are like. And yes, you can't be guided by emotion, but the context that the fans will set, the atmosphere that could develop on Sunday, that feeds directly into the environment that players play within. And Ibrox can be so powerful if it's with you, and it will swallow you up if it's against you. So that's my real feeling this morning, Jonny, is that you need to get the idea off the ground. The phrase that Patrick Stewart used when he was speaking after Russell Martin was, you need to build the plane. Build the plane while you're flying it. I keep forgetting what the exact.
Yeah, I think that's the rough analogy. Yeah. And it's a good analogy, and it's correct. I don't
think he's done that, because I don't think he's brought any form of stability. Backed Clement twice in a month before dismissing him, and then Rangers go to this extremity of a manager who's completely different to him, and there was always going to be this short-term pain, but the extent of it last night was beyond comprehension. I think beyond what anyone really anticipated.
Yeah, listen, I think a lot of it is just hot air, to be honest. I can only be honest about the kind of development of a team. I've seen multiple teams very quickly adopt the philosophy of their coach. Look at Motherwell. Almost straight away, they've completely changed their style of play with, players that aren't anywhere near the quality of Rangers. If we're talking about Rangers, remember Mark Warburton coming in. I know it was the Championship, but you'd seen the style of football that they were playing under the previous manager, and over a few seasons. And Mark Warburton changed the style of play almost immediately. Ange Postecoglou at Celtic, people are talking about, oh, well, Ange had a sticky start at Celtic. Yes, but the underlying data was very, very, very good for Celtic indeed. They were getting unlucky in these games, and they also won 2 games 6-0 and 1 game 3-0 in their first 5 games in domestic football. So it's completely different. And every Rangers fan that I see on social media or I talk to, they all say the same thing, which is, we can't see what Russell Martin is trying to do. Maybe it's too sophisticated for us, but we can't see it. Whatever it is, it's not showing. And I think growing, more and more people saying the same thing, it's getting worse. So gradually, game by game, the little shoots that you saw, oh, that's a nice little thing I saw there, or that's promising, those are diminishing. And to the point that last night, they were invisible.
Yeah.
And you just can't accept that kind of performance. Josh, Without Jack Butland, Rangers have lost that game 10-0 last night. They've hit the bar twice. Well, hit the woodwork twice, should I say. Jack Butland's had several terrific saves. One in particular, ball's going straight into the top bin, and he's clawed it out. Brugge took their foot off the gas because they knew the game was done and dusted, and why risk an injury in a game like that? It was a truly appalling performance, and I don't say lightly that it was the worst 45 minutes of football that I've seen from Rangers in my life. Genuinely, I've thought about it. I've thought about it deeply. I've never seen anything like it, and from a point of view of the kind of football, the style of football, the way the goals were lost, it's just not acceptable. I think what Rangers need to do, they need to scour the market from here on in and find two competent, experienced centre-backs who can defend. Because otherwise, this team is built on sand, this entire thing. And I don't care if they're 36 or 21, but there needs to be two competent centre-backs to build around, no matter who the manager is. And by all accounts, we're not expecting the Rangers board to act here. You know, I think they will get to the end of this week. They will give Russell Martin the chance to go into that Celtic game. But, you know, at that point, if he loses the Celtic game, if they play the same way as they've been playing, I suppose there's an international break, and then you can make your own conclusions on what might happen after that.
Yeah, Nathan says we have to go and sign serial winners to rebuild. I definitely think.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say it's easy to say, but it's hard to get that on the budget that Rangers have.
True serial winners. But what I don't think is, listen, if Rangers had sat here only signing 5 players, we'd be saying, why have they not signed 10 players? But I think if the requirement for this summer was go and get 4 or 5 players that you can build around, that build in it, not have 3 your back 4 on loan. Go and get if you're going to usurp Tavernier, make sure it's someone who's going to be here for the next 3 years. If you're going to, I think Nasser Giga would be fine as a secondary centre back, but instead you've went, can you go and fix this defence? Because John Souttar's demonstrated over a number of years that I don't think he's good enough to be the main centre back for Rangers. That's the issue for me. That I was speaking to someone about one of the players that Rangers had signed, and they were just making the point that this guy's a good player, but is he ready to go in and be a leader at Ibrox? Is he ready to go in and be a starter? No, and it's a big difference between going into a settled squad where and you've seen this with the loan players that Rangers have signed that kind of haven't worked, but have gone on to have good careers elsewhere. It's a big difference in a settled squad where you come in a good environment and you've got a senior pro ahead of you and you're challenging them, as opposed to the culture that is developed here of a senior leadership squad who can't get Rangers out of the positions that they're in. Too much pressure being put on a young group.
Absolutely, Josh. Look at the players that Rangers have had over the last few years. Incredible talent. Yeah. Malik Tillman, Amad Diallo, under major pressure, major scrutiny. A lot of people saying they weren't good enough. These guys are massively out with anything Rangers could afford to buy in terms of pure talent. So it shows you, it proves that talent just isn't enough. So you need more than that. You need experience. You need nous in this league. And you'll only get the time to build as a manager if you can win games. And until Russell Martin kind of picks up on that and learns from that, and I would also apply that to Kevin Thelwell and the team behind the scenes, you know, they've got to learn quickly as well. I think, you know, even if Russell Martin is not to last, as I think we expect, I certainly expect that he won't. You have to give them the opportunity to go, okay, we've made a mistake here. It's not the mistake. Mistakes happen. I make mistakes. You make mistakes. Everyone watching this show makes mistakes. It's not the mistakes. It's how you address the mistakes once they're made. That's the important thing. And all eyes will be on the power brokers at Rangers after this Old Firm game on Sunday. That's for sure.
Yeah, Chris reporting, I believe, on the website. Chris is in some airport somewhere making his way back. That expectation is at the moment that pressure from above is not translating into any pressure on Russell Martin's job at the moment. That was, again, what Russell Martin said, I think, in his TNT interview, Jonny, that He'd spoken to Kevin Thelwell and Patrick Stewart after the game. We're going to stay on for a few more minutes, but I spoke to Chris last night from the bowels of the Brugge Stadium, so I will play to you our short conversation on Chris's view, seeing as he couldn't join us live, having watched that game last night. Watch that, witness that tonight in Belgium. Chris, your kind of initial thoughts. You've heard from Russell Martin in the press conference. We know what he had to say by now. What was it like from your view tonight?
I said in my analysis piece it was that bad it had to be seen to be believed. And I think that sums it up. Had the misfortune of being at Ibrox a few years ago when Liverpool took 7 off Rangers that night. Lost a 7-1 defeat. That was Liverpool. With all respect to Club Brugge, they are not Liverpool. They are a very good side. They have some very good players, but you look at it through a Rangers prism, and there are no words to sum up how bad that was, how unacceptable it was, and ultimately people should be paying the price for it. Rangers cannot be in that situation where they lose a European tie by that margin. Press conference, I thought it's fascinating listening to Russell Martin and seeing him speak these days. He doesn't give off the vibe of a man who's fearing for his job or who's under any undue pressure. Maybe he knows something that we don't in terms of the backing that he's going to be given, or the promises that have been made, or what's to come in the final days of the transfer window. But we're now far enough into this project to say that's his team, and that defeat tonight, it's obviously on the players for the way that they just chucked it basically. But it's also on the head coach, and he can't escape his share of that responsibility.
Yeah, I want to ask you about just like you've been at a lot of Rangers games, you've covered a lot of Rangers games, so I want to ask you where that ranks, just in terms of, as you say, you have to see it to believe it. But in terms of the inevitable questions about job security after this, that Russell Martin has been asked in this press conference, has been asked on the TV, the singing in the away end today, we've seen this movie repeatedly over recent years, and this is a result that type of result Rangers managers tend not to survive. How do you view this situation under new ownership? Because Rangers have been very, I would say, effusive in their point that, look, this is going to take time, we're sticking to it regardless. Short-term pain is something that Russell Martin has spoken about a lot. But with even the American owners being at the game on Sunday, this could get very toxic at the weekend, could it not, if Rangers don't get a positive result?
The ownership is one of the key fascinating parts of that, because we don't know what they'll be thinking. They've obviously never been in this situation before. They've never hired and fired Rangers managers before. They've hired one. What we've seen so far suggests that they've made the wrong call there. Do they continue to back Russell Martin? Do they continue to put time, money and effort into it? Or do they think, actually, we've tried it, it's not worked, it's time to go in a different direction? We just don't know what their perspective on it will be, what their stance will be. If they needed any reminder of just what kind of football club they've bought and the fans and the expectations here, that'll arrive on Sunday. As I say, all of the board, or most of the board, will be at that game. If Rangers were to fall 9 points behind Celtic at that stage of the season, they are going to be left in no doubt what the Rangers fans think. The fans that come over here, pay their money. Again, I said it in my piece on the site. These are the guys that pay thousands of pounds every single year, taking days off at work, flying trains, planes and automobiles everywhere to go and follow this side, and they're served up that. No way is that acceptable, and their voices deserve to be heard and will continue to be heard. As if things go badly on Sunday, Ibrox will be quite the toxic atmosphere.
Here we are, we're back. That was a bit close. That was Chris's view from the stadium last night, subsequently reporting on the Rangers Review. And I'll just read you Chris's story that Russell Martin retains the support of the Ibrox board for now, set to be in the dugout for the Old Firm showdown with Celtic. We'll move on to Chris on the show with us tomorrow, like the inevitable where do Rangers go from here questions, and looking ahead to Sunday. I put at the end of my piece on the website today, Jonny, that once again, and you said you watched Celtic's games in Kazakhstan, they obviously had their own pretty disastrous Champions League defeat. But I think one of the many presiding frustrations will be, once again, Rangers find themselves in a position where they're not strong enough to strike when Celtic are weak. Now, that's before the game. Maybe they will manage to turn it around. That's my feeling going into it. Your brief thoughts ahead of Sunday and what could unfold, what might unfold.
Look, Celtic are not in a good situation either. They're not a side that is going through a good moment. They have had a bruising defeat to a poor side. They've gone and travelled 4,000 miles. So you couldn't have had a more delicious opportunity from a Rangers point of view to take them on and to give Brendan Rodgers a real setback and give the Celtic board and just the overall harmony, because of the tone of things at that club at the moment, a real jolt. But the truth is, as bad as Celtic are, I still think they're in better shape. Now, am I right in saying, Josh, that they haven't conceded a domestic goal? That they, certainly in the league games,
I think they've conceded one against Falkirk, but yeah, not in the league.
Yeah, didn't concede against Almaty over the two games, so defensively they're still quite sound. I know it's the attack that's the issue there. Ida's off form, Maida's off form, but do you know what? Dyson Maida against Rangers always produces. From a Rangers point of view, you look at their players and you think there are guys there that have been over the course that know what they're doing, and will come to Ibrox and feel very confident that they can lay a marker down for the rest of the season. I look at Rangers and I think, well, who's the personalities that's going to dominate this fixture? The one that you know that can do it is Nico Raskin, because he's done it. He's done it over the last few games. He's been the best player in that midfield. But will he play? That, can Russell Martin flip-flop again?
Has to. I mean, we'll have loads. We've not even spoken about transfers, which feels like a rarity in the summer. And again, we'll do more on that tomorrow. We reported yesterday that those talks had commenced with Bojan Miovski. Our understanding is that there's optimism that a permanent deal could be done. Earlier discussions had perhaps focused on more of a loan with obligation. Rangers need more than that. Nico Raskin has to start on Sunday. Aside from that, if Rangers are able to get the Miovski deal over the line, if they're able to get him in, I'd be tempted to throw him straight in, because Danilo, I think, hasn't taken his opportunity. He looks for me. He looks like a player who he's just had 2 years of injuries, hasn't he? And I think that.
It's sad. It's sad, Josh, because you watched quite a lot of him. I remember when he was brought in, and you felt like he could add something.
I think when he first came in, when he first came in, and I think he'd been Feyenoord's main striker for like his first 6 months of the season, but he was quick. Now you watch him, and I think you see, unfortunately, that knee injuries impacted him. And I think Raskin has to come in, and I think James Tavernier has to come back in. Jonny, surely. I mean, can you start Max Aarons after that?
No,
I don't think so.
No, it's that thing of the manager going back to the well with players that he's clearly not having the best of times with. It's going to be fascinating to see how it pans out. There's so much drama and so much intrigue in this game at the best of times, but now more so than ever. I just think Rangers really, really need to start thinking about what they need, and what they need, not in a airy-fairy technical way, but in a practical way. You talked about the word practicality at the start of this, Josh, and the ideology versus the reality. And the reality of the Scottish League is stark. I think they need to get their data team on guys who can deal with balls into the box, who have got experience, who've played at clubs where there's pressure, all these aspects, because there's not long left. There's only a matter of days, and they need to get their skates on. Miovski would be a good start. He's going to be a good player for Rangers, in my view, if they can get that done. I really, really back that signing. I'd like to see a move for Kenny McLean. Josh, that's one that the rumours keep on circulating. We've not been able to get any truth on that, but that's one that if you could get him out of Norwich, a guy who's just a king of second balls, and I know it might sound a little bit regressive, doesn't have to play every game again, but someone who knows the club, who understands the club, who can bring the intangibles to that dressing room. Anyone you can get like that, I think you just have to go and get.
Yeah, okay, right. Well, that was long, but I thought that was actually quite enjoyable in a cathartic, unenjoyable sense, Jonny, if that makes sense. We appreciate everyone joining us. Loads of you joining us live. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. It really helps us to do more and more of these videos. We've got loads of exciting plans for the new season, even if the football is retains to be not quite there. You can also continue to get that entry-level offer on the website for a subscription. Loads of content over there today. Interviews from the Mix Zone coming up as well. And we'll be back tomorrow morning. Jonny, do you have one more thing to say, or am I presuming?
All I would say is, Josh, it's easy to be negative and to be downcast and to look at this from a Rangers point of view, from a perspective of, well, that's the season done. I don't believe that. I think that this is a misstep. And sometimes in life, you have to go backwards to go forwards.
Yeah.
Rangers can still right this. There's nothing set in stone. Everything's still available. It's going to be tough, of course it is, especially in the league. But with the right moves over the next few days in the boardroom and from people like Thelwell, I think that Rangers can find a way through this. This is an ownership group that people should be excited about. They've made mistakes here. There's no doubt about it. I think everyone can see that. But there is money there. They've proven that. There is expertise there. We have to judge them over the course of longer time than this when it comes to the overall running of the club. The football department is a different story, but I genuinely believe that sometimes you have to make mistakes and learn from them. And I would say don't quite be disheartened yet, because I think there's a lot of good things to come from this American ownership with the expertise that are there. If you look at the 49ers as an organisation and what they've done in sport, in terms of the brand, in terms of all the associated elements of sport that are so important in 2025, I think the bigger picture is still bright if the right decisions get made.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks.
I don't know if that's persuaded anyone or not. But...
yeah, no, lots of so much to discuss. We'll continue to discuss over the coming days into the final days of the transfer window. Of course, we'll be bringing you extra coverage on deadline day too. So stay tuned. We'll speak to you soon. Have a good day if you can, and goodbye.